Morning, everybody. Chris here. Welcome back to 30-Day Excel Analyst. This is day 7. This is the third of 4 days on data management in Excel. And today we're dealing with the topic of data input to Excel. Yes, data cleansing is cool. You know how to do it after yesterday's session using Power Query. But the truth is, we never need to do data cleansing, or perhaps we won't need to do it if we can do the data input correctly. Yes, rather than looking at the symptom, which is cleaning up the data, let's look at the cause. Let's try to input data properly into Excel. That's what we're going to learn over the next 10 to 15 minutes. If you're watching live, a big welcome. I'll deal with the comments. I'll get into the chat towards the end of the session. And if you're watching on replay, thank you so much for joining me. Leave me a comment below. I'm very happy to discuss whatever you want to discuss related to the program right there. So day 7. 30-Day Excel Analyst. And just quickly before we jump into data input into the spreadsheet, let's just get an overview. We love overviews on 30-Day Excel Analyst. We always work from the whole to the parts, not from the parts to the whole. So what have we dealt with so far? Well, we've looked at the role of Power Query quite extensively with regard to data management. Yesterday, we went through various things we could do, including data cleansing. So I hope you've spent the time to play with Power Query, apply those meta skills, and develop your confidence there. Data import. So we've looked at what I'd call a modern data collection mechanism using forms, dovetailing beautifully with desktop Excel, where we can use VBA and using Power Query too. This is the approach we use on our projects to actually collect data. So what else do we have to do? Well, today we're going to focus on data input, particularly cell validation in Excel, things like drop-down menus, but also things like helpful layout. So how should you set up a spreadsheet for data import, a couple of keyboard shortcuts. And then today we'll touch on the role of tables. That's a bit more tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll talk quickly about some formulae you can use for data cleansing, because you don't have to use Power Query for data cleansing. You can use formulae in the spreadsheet. And we'll talk about some keyboard shortcuts, and we'll generally bring the whole huge topic of data management in Excel together. That's all coming tomorrow. That will conclude Data Management Week. So what are we working on today? We always like to give ourselves a real world focus. This is an applied course or a task similar to what I do day in, day out in my Excel development work here at Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions. So our task here, you are tasked with setting up a survey of local dog walkers. There's many in my village. It's a big community. The aim of the survey is to understand how they walk their dog. You are given the questions your customer wants to answer, along with a list of local dogs and their kennels. You suggest an online survey. You've done the 30-Day Excel Analyst course. The modern, smooth, user-friendly way to do this is using an online form. But your customer is old school, their words, not ours, and asks you to set up a spreadsheet instead in desktop Excel. This is inspired by a current dialogue I'm having with a customer. I'm trying to get them to use online forms, and they literally use the term old school. They're not too keen on it. And this is what it's like being a real world analyst. It's about project management, persuasion, and showing your client the best options. It's not just about technical stuff in Excel. So our task is to set up the dog survey spreadsheet for data input. Now, as always, 30-Day Excel Analyst. As always, we should have a spreadsheet open, so let's go and open one. As always, the resources are available for you. So the link in the video description below will take you to a Dropbox folder. I've organized the resources day by day there. Also links in the video description below to the whole course playlist. So these videos will remain available for you for reference, and to links to other relevant videos. So this is what we're working towards. So I'm suggesting when we're talking about data input into the spreadsheet, we're working towards something like this. But in the file, we've got input 1 and input 2. So just take the time first to note down some of the differences between input 1 and input 2. So maybe you want to note down some differences in the chat. If you're watching on replay, take the time to pause and just note down a few of the differences. So I'll go through the main differences now. Firstly, input 2. So I'm saying this is suboptimal. This is not what we want to be doing. Firstly, there's no real helpful formatting. Now, formatting it's not just about making the spreadsheet look good. It's more practical and functional than that. It's about guiding your user, So let's compare to this. We've got formatting that guides the user. For example, helpful cell borders increase the readability, allow the user to read across the spreadsheet. So there's that basic support there, but there's a bit more than that, because the formatting, the color of the cells there actually tells us the role of the cell. So the formatting of the cell tells us the role of the cell. These cells are input cells. You can see we've got drop-down menus here. This one's actually a dynamic drop-down menu that we'll talk about in a second. So the input cells are formatted differently than these cells over here. They're formulae. It's a very common setup you'll have in an Excel spreadsheet. Some cells want input from the user. Other cells, there's formulae in there. So you want to display some information. In this case, we're using VLOOKUP. When we get to modeling week, we'll be covering formulae, including VLOOKUP. So the setup is important. Let's go back to our suboptimal spreadsheet. Again, what we can see here is input cells and formulae cells are mixed together. In our best practice spreadsheet, we've got the formulae cells down here in a different format, and then we've got the data input cells over this side. In our Let's Good example, those two are mixed in. I see this all the time, and it's something we want to avoid. So we've got an input cell here. We can tell it's an input cell just by looking in the formula bar. There isn't a formula there. And then moving across, this is a formula. And then we have another input cell and another input cell, and then we have another formula. So we want to avoid this. We want to avoid a total lack of formatting. The formatting should not just be pretty, it should be functional, it should support user understanding, and then the layout. So it's the formatting and the layout. You can see we've got all of our input cells together. Now, let's just deal with these errors quickly. If you are using Excel formulae, this is a more advanced point, but I would recommend using a mechanism to ensure you don't get these value not available errors, or you don't get values that just don't really mean anything showing up in the spreadsheet. So if we go to our better practice spreadsheet, the formulae over on the right, of course, you can see I've used an if formula and embedded our VLOOKUP formula inside the if formula there. This means that if there's nothing in the cell, and you can see there's nothing in this cell yet, this formula is not going to display anything. So again, good practice with data input. That's decluttering the interface, making that experience better for the user. What else have we got here? Well, another quick point on formatting, and we do have a session later in the program where we're going to talk about formatting, and I'm going to give you all my tips and tricks. But this I call a color reverse. It's just a very simple formatting concept. I call it a color reverse. So I've selected two colors here, the purple color and then the blue color. And for the input cells, we've gone for blue with black. And then I've done a color reverse here. So rather than the blue in the background, we've got the purple in the background, and then I've got the white text. So cells with different roles using that color reverse tactic, that's a good way to communicate those different roles there. So they're the main point as far as I see it. Let's deal quickly with data capacity management. So I'm just using a range here. Yeah, so this is just a small scale example. You would at least want to extend this range. It's possible to manage data using ranges. That's what I tend to do on my project. On my projects, there's a bit of a trigger warning here. A lot of people don't like that. I've put videos in the video description below where we're discussing this topic. What are the options here? We'll talk about more about this tomorrow, but formatting your data as a table. So we can select it and go to format as table here. That's the easiest way to give you a easy data capacity management approach. In other words, just an approach that allows you easily to add rows to the bottom of the database. So you could format this as a table to do that. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. So what else have we got here? Well, in this spreadsheet, what are we missing? So the kennel, we've got one of four options. So the person who's commissioned this survey, they said the dogs come from particular kennels, and you can see on the list sheet. So now we're talking about overall file structure. There's two elements to file design. We've got a session on this later too. We talk about the layout of each sheet, the role of each sheet, and we talk about the overall file structure. And one I talk about generic sheet roles as well. So most of my Excel files have some sheets with particular roles. The engine sheet being one of these sheet roles that you would have seen many times on the Tiger YouTube channel if you've been following for a long time. If you're just joining us, a big welcome to the Tiger community, by the way. So we've got the list sheet, and we're using this sheet for a specific purpose, specifically to make these lists. Now, why do we need lists? It's because we've got a limited number of entries, and we want to limit the user to those specific entries. Yes, if we can control the data as it comes in, if we can make it predictable, if we know it's going to be north, south, east, or west, that can have profound implications for what happens later in the project and what you're having to do as an Excel analyst. And this is the point I made right at the beginning of the session. Yes, data cleansing, fantastic. Power Query, VBA, you can be the hero. Yeah, you can clean up that data to stop your customer having to do all that work. Yeah, and that's fantastic. You know, I've done that many times. And yeah, I said in the video description, that gives me a kick just like anybody else. But the truth is, if you can set up your data input mechanism properly, you're not going to have to do that data cleansing later because you've done data validation to begin with. Yeah, a stitch in time saves 9. Don't treat the symptom. Yeah, dirty data, less suboptimal data. That's a symptom that causes a lack of data validation on the way into the spreadsheet. So if we didn't have data validation, you can see on our suboptimal input to sheet here, you know, I can put a space in after south, for example. I can put in southwest. I can put in anything here, and you can see already that's creating errors in the spreadsheet. So we want to limit those inputs. We want to make them predictable. That means our formulae are going to be able to handle them, and we won't have formulae errors and a host of other issues. So how to do that? We do that with data validation. The particular dialog box we're going to get to know is in the data tab. And then data validation is right here. We've got a couple of boxes with a tick and a kind of stop sign there. So that's the idea. We're stopping data that we don't want to come into the spreadsheet here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear the data validation here. How to do that? Alt-AVV. Alt-AVV on the Windows PC gets you into the data validation dialog box. You can just click on the icon as I did before. This allows you to clear the data validation. So now I can type anything into these cells. That's not what we want, of course. You can see our error has crept into the spreadsheet there. So how to quickly set up a drop-down menu. I'm holding down the Shift key here to expand the selection on the Windows PC. Data tab, data validation, keyboard shortcut, Alt-AVV, and let's set up that drop-down menu. Cool. So we go to List for a drop-down menu. And then in source, Excel is saying, where are the values that you want to display in this drop-down menu? Luckily, not luckily, by design, we thought about the overall workbook structure. We've got a sheet dedicated to housing these lists. Now, on this sheet, there's something fancy going on over here. I'm not going to explain that too much, but that's to do with dynamic drop-down menus. All we need to do at the moment is select the values we want to appear in our drop-down menu. Hit enter, and that's how easy it is, guys. Suddenly, we've got a beautiful, easy to use drop-down menu, even easier to use with the keyboard shortcut. So hold down the Alt key. Firstly, navigate to the cell using the arrow keys, using the cursor keys. Hold down the Alt key and the down arrow. That allows you to access the drop-down menu without even using the mouse. This can massively accelerate your data input. So say we've got West there. Okay, different options for drop-down menus. There's a super sneaky, easy way to make a drop-down menu. So here we've got a choice between lead or harness. So it's just one of two things. We can use a drop-down menu for that. Once again, going to go into the drop-down menu dialog box. Let's just deal with this, by the way. Did you see when I selected this cell, we're giving the user guidance? This is another data input aid that we can use. Now, what's this? What's this here? This is called an input message. So let's illustrate this quickly. When I click on the cell, automatically this flashes up. Now, clearly, this could be used too much, couldn't it? If you use too much of this, then the spreadsheet's going to feel cluttered. But every now and again, an input message, you can see I've set it up here. with a really directive message, not a patronizing message, not a message that just says you're doing it wrong, a message that's directive, somewhat empathetic, phrased in a way that's clear, not bossy. All of these things is what we want to do for the user. That's how you set up an input message. We've got three options at the top here: settings, input message, and error alert. We're going to deal with error alert in a second, but that's an input message used judiciously. Not all the time can make a big difference to your data input experience. But let's go for a simple drop-down menu here. So in the source box, we can select list here. I'm just going to delete these to show you exactly how I do it. So we can go to any value. That's going to switch the data validation off. Any value can go in. We're going to go to list, and you can just type the values you want to appear in the list. You can just type them in here. I only discovered this a couple of years ago. It's a super quick way to create a drop-down menu. You can also type those values into the spreadsheet on the list sheet as we did previously. This is a super quick way to do it. So now, drop-down menu, we've got our input message, and then we've got lead and harness there. So this is text-based data validation using drop-down menus, an absolute staple for the Excel analyst. What if we're talking about numerical inputs? Now in spreadsheets, generally, I see quite a lot of drop-down menus. Love drop-down menus. You can see how to set them up. Numerical validation. Numerical validation is really quite rare in Excel spreadsheets. So what does it feel like? Well, if I want to put text into this cell, I can't do it. There we go. Now we've got an error alert. And once again, what is this error alert like? It's a helpful error alert. It's directive. Yeah. And it's not just saying to the user, you've got it wrong. That's going to frustrate the user. It's saying to the user, we've got a problem, but I'm kind of on your side. I'm going to direct you. I'm going to tell you what you need to do to work through this so you can get on with your day. This is a customized error message. Input the number of minutes you spend walking your dog, e.g. 65. So you always give an example, of the kind of input that you want. So to set up Alt-A-V-V again, to set up that customized error alert, you can do that over here. So in the title, I tend to put the column header, the piece of data that we're looking for effectively, and then a directive message. So you're not saying what you shouldn't do, you're saying what you should do. So here you don't say, don't input text. Yeah, you say input the number of minutes, input a number, and give an example. So it's empathetic and directive. That's what we're looking to do as Excel programmers. Don't want to be the smartest guy in the room, don't want to be the person in the ivory tower. We want to be there to help people. Excel is a means to an end. It helps you help people. Right. So numerical validation, what options have we got? So in settings, we've already done the list. You've got a few options here. You can ask for a decimal. In this case, I'm asking for a whole number, and then we've got minimum and maximum values here. So we've got the list-based validation for text, numerical validation for numbers. You can also ask for decimals, dates and times you can ask for, and you can limit the text as well. We'll do that in just a second. But once again, Excel meta skill, it's up to you to spend the time to play with this, trial and error, debugging, and to develop the skill yourself. Play really is the vital word. Go and have a play with this. Right, what about this cell? Time off the lead. So a nice little validation mechanism here. If I want to say the time the dog's off the lead is more than the actual walk is 20 minutes, the time off the lead is 30 minutes, then we're going to get another directive error message. If I want to put less than the total walk time, we're allowed to do that. So how do you set that up? The logic here is the value has to be less than what's in this cell here. And you can see how I've set that up there. These boxes, because we've got these little arrows here, I've done a fancy if formula. That's not really necessary, I don't think. But these boxes, because we've got the arrows, that's Excel saying you don't need to put the number in here. You can point to a cell. And by pointing to the cell, it makes things more dynamic, because whatever's in the cell, that becomes the data validation rule. Pretty cool. Can you see how this is all coming together? Finally, We've got a nice input message. Again, what type of terrain here? So if I want to type in grass, that's fine. If I want to type in a very long entry here, does it work? We've got a problem here. Now, I've broken my own rules, haven't I? Because this is just the standard error message for the data validation block. So I would want to program this with a customized error message. Alt-AVV. This is text length. So if you want to limit the amount of text that can go into a cell, you can say text length between or less than. And that just allows you, to do exactly what we said to limit the amount of text in the cell. Also worth noting at this point, just look at the column widths as well. I've thought about the kind of data that's going to go in, and those column widths are set up to accommodate that data, avoid situations like this, for example, where yes, we can't read the text properly because the column width isn't sufficient there. That's another thing. That's another way that your spreadsheet layout can support data input and the assimilation of the data by the user. Okay, so that's the basic stuff. Also got some formulae, but the main point is the formulae are separate from the data input cells. Now, what about this feature? If you've downloaded the file, you'll be able to see there's a dynamic drop-down menu here. What does that mean? Well, according to the kennel inputs, the possible inputs for the dogs change. So if this is south, we have Kuda as the first dog. If this is north, then we have Luna as the first dog. If this is west, then you can see the drop-down menu changing according to another input in the spreadsheet. That's also pretty cool, I think. So that's a dependent dynamic drop-down menu. We're not going to go through that now, but in the video description below, I've put a link to one of our videos where we explain how to set up this system. Even better, Excel meta skill, try to work it out for yourself. Yeah. Now it looks a bit intimidating with all these formulae, but what the basic idea is, if we can write out the reference in a cell, and I've been able to get those, the numbers and letters I need dynamically using row formula, accounting formula here. This formula gives us the letter of the column. Bringing all these together with a concatenation allows me to write out the reference in a cell, and that reference will change dynamically according to the inputs. We can then use indirect in the data validation dialog box, and that allows us to get that dynamic drop-down menu. So that's also possible. I find customers love that. The dependent dynamic drop-down menu, you can see that a video in the video description below is linked, and you can learn how to do this. Cool. So the basics there, guys, the basics of data input in Excel, data input to the spreadsheet. Remember, if you can control the data input and validate the data properly, you shouldn't have to go and do those data cleansing exercises. Though they are cool, they might not be necessary if you get the data validation stage right. As I said, it's so often overlooked, just simple cell validation. People want to talk about validation with VBA and all fancy stuff. Just simple cell validation is pre-built into Excel for you to use. Make sure you're using it. We've looked at drop-down menus, other types of validation, using guidance messages, informative error messages. Also talked about helpful layouts and formatting. Formatting is not just about making things pretty. The format of the cell should tell the user what the role of the cell is. So the formatting supports the user experience. Looked at some keyboard shortcuts to help. So the Alt and down arrow shortcut to allow you to access a drop-down menu, for example. We've briefly spoken about tables. I'm saying you could tabulate that data tomorrow. We're going to deal with the issue of capacity management. We're going to try to bring the whole topic of data management in Excel together. We're going to talk about the role of tables, dynamic arrays, ranges. How are you going to manage a changing data set? Because all data sets are changing in size these days. You need a policy, you need an approach for that. Fantastic. So any questions, you can put them in the chat now, guys. Let's say hi. So who's with us? The general is with us. Make sure you salute the general, please. Jorgen is with us over in this. I'm going to look up where your islands are, General. The Åland Islands in Scandinavia somewhere, I believe. Sounds fantastic. I'm going to look them up on Google and just get a taste for your experience there. Arnie's with us. Arnie, I think you've been in every session. Always appreciate your company. What time is it down in Sydney, my friend? Heavy Downpour is with us. Oh, from South Africa, another beautiful part of the world. Fantastic. Keith is with us. How are you doing, Keith? Always good to have you with us. Michael, how's it going? Bert, how are you doing? Kieran as well. Vessel tuning in. I think it might be your first session. Big welcome to you. Roger tuning in as well, one of our members here at Tiger. Good to see you, Roger. Samuel tuning in, and Albert too. Always good to see you, Albert. So thanks very much for the company, guys. Any questions? Get them in the chat now, guys. I'll deal with them. Heavy Downpour says, I once used error alert to prank a colleague who was terrible at capturing data. Simple stuff. I used error alert to display a message from the authorities regarding data found on his pick. Hilarious. Well, there you go. Excel-based humor. It's alive and well. Heavy Downpour. You know, I love that stuff. Absolutely fantastic. Very good, guys. So can't see any questions. So thanks so much for watching. Tomorrow is the last day in data management week. We're going to look at that data capacity management, the role of tables, dynamic arrays, things like that. Essential stuff for the modern Excel analyst. Take care, guys. I will see you same time tomorrow.